F1's grand plan to fix the flawed 2026 engines for next season could be dashed, which would almost certainly force Max Verstappen to quit for good. Verstappen has made it clear that F1 must go through with a planned overhaul of its divisive current engines for 2027 for him to stick around, but that process has currently reached an impasse. The key to unlocking the solution is an unlikely one: Audi. That's right, the fate of F1's big rules proposal, and therefore Verstappen's future, is in the hands of a new manufacturer that's only a midfielder and clearly has a lot more political clout off track than it does influence on it. And before you write this off as Verstappen playing politics of his own, sources close to him are clear he's dead serious. His comments come from the heart, and he simply hates what he has to race with at the moment. So what's going on here? The divisive 2026 rules have ushered in a new era of engines that are almost a 50-50 split between internal combustion and electric power. And there is broad consensus among teams, drivers and engine manufacturers that moving away from this would be beneficial. It's placed a big emphasis on driving in weird ways to charge the battery, which doesn't have enough capacity to fully utilise the MG UK anyway, and big differences in electric power deployment are the defining feature of the kind of racing seen so far this year. Verstappen's one of many who hates the consequences of this, and despite often pushing back on criticism of the 2026 rules, F1 and the FIA have accepted there are problems. Some rule tweaks to mitigate the most extreme consequences of the engines were introduced in Miami after F1's April break. This aimed to make qualifying more normal with less battery charging required even on a single push lap, but came at the cost of total power output over the lap and leads to a slightly slower lap time. And though it's helped, it's a case of treating the symptom, not the cause. In between the Miami and Canadian races though, the FIA announced there was a broad agreement in principle to make bigger changes to the engines for 2027. The basic idea is to increase fuel flow and reduce the MG UK power output in qualifying to alter the power ratio closer to a 60-40 split in favour of the V6, and that, potentially in combination with increased battery capacity, would make the driving demands much more normal. The devil's in the details though, and during the Montreal weekend it became clear the plan is in serious jeopardy, at least for 2027. F1 boss Stefano Domenicali and senior FIA figures met with various manufacturers in Montreal. FIA single-seater director Nicolas Tombazis was even seen marching up and down the paddock, holding bilateral meetings with various parties. The problem is timing. Under F1's governance rules, changes to the engine regulations for next year requires backing from 4 of the 6 manufacturers, and the FIA has quietly shifted its strategy. Rather than seeking full unanimity, which evaporated quickly after Miami, the push now is simply to reach the supermajority needed in the Power Unit Advisory Committee, 4 of the 6 manufacturers. Get there, and the change goes through regardless of who's still holding out. Right now, only Mercedes and Red Bull are confirmed supporters of implementing the change in 2027. The remaining 4 are either opposed or holding significant reservations, and the window for agreeing anything is closing fast given the lead time required for hardware redesigns anyway. Audi's resistance is primarily financial. As a manufacturer still finding its feet in F1 and already working within a budget cap, committing to what sources suggest could be a $10 million plus development program feels hard to justify. The team has indicated it could accept minor tweaks but isn't prepared to pursue the full 60-40 target on such a short timeline. Ferrari's concern is more competitive in nature. It centres on Aduo, the additional development and upgrade opportunities mechanism, which is F1's new for 2026 formal catch-up system, allowing manufacturers who are behind on engine performance to spend more and develop further. Ferrari believes Aduo is its best route to closing the gap to Mercedes. If the engine rules are opened up, that mechanism would have to be reset or scrapped to avoid giving any already developed manufacturer an unfair advantage, and Ferrari isn't willing to sacrifice that lifeline. Honda and General Motors, which entered its Cadillac team into F1 this season, are also understood to have reservations of their own, although these are less defined clearly publicly. Honda's position certainly seems to be the most malleable, not actively opposed but waiting to see how things develop, so it could fall into line quickly if Audi moves and the FIA indicates to Honda this is what it wants it to do. The FIA's proposal hasn't even reached a formal ballot yet because it's already obvious it doesn't have enough backing. But the hope is that some common ground can still be found, particularly around convincing Audi to shift its position. If that happens and Honda follows, Mercedes and Red Bull give the FIA its 4 votes. Then Ferrari and GM would be powerless to block it. They may even be forced to the table to negotiate concessions rather than walk away with nothing. That could be significant because there's also a longer game at play. The FIA doesn't want a fudge that needs revisiting in 12 months, it wants a single clean fix that holds for the rest of this rules cycle, all the way through to a new V8 era arriving in 2031, if not earlier. We all know Verstappen is no fan of the overtaking heavy yo-yo racing triggered by these engines, as drivers tend to take turns swapping positions depending on how much battery they have. But he's also among those who share the widespread dislike for how complicated the engines are to use and how little control the drivers feel they have over what the engine's doing, which impacts overall lap time, how unpredictable the car can be, and how they can race. Verstappen made it clear back in Japan in March that he was seriously considering his immediate future in F1 based on how little he enjoys the current rules. At the start of the weekend in Canada, he strongly suggested he will continue racing in F1 next season if the proposal to reduce the engine's electric power dependency goes through. Verstappen said this is definitely heading into a very positive direction when he addressed the proposal for the first time in Montreal and called it the minimum I was hoping for. In fact, the more he discussed the matter, the more strongly he implied that it could guarantee he stays on the grid. And there was an interview from Thursday in Canada with Dutch newspaper De Telegraaf in which Verstappen emphatically stated he'd be here. That emerged slightly belatedly in the middle of the Canada weekend, and understandably got widely interpreted as the end of the story, but as we knew the 2027 engine plan was far from settled, it felt like some critical context was missing. And sure enough, when we had the chance to ask Verstappen about it again once that doubt was more established, his position shifted and he was very flat out. He said it's just not mentally doable for me to stay like this, absolutely not, and was unequivocal that a sabbatical doesn't interest him. Verstappen had gone into the Canada weekend off the back of almost winning the Nürburgring 24 Hours on his debut there, and says there's a lot of other fun things out there, so if he walks away, that's him done with F1 for good. It's a clear escalation in his position because his patience with the rules but also the politics around them has clearly run out. His stance is that the FIA and F1 need to force the issue regardless of resistance, and if you think Max has called at all because of the mitigations that have at least made things a little better with the rules in Miami and Canada, think again. He absolutely sledged the engines after qualifying last weekend, saying it's still super confusing how the engine behaviour changes. And when a question implied it was something related to what the team was doing, Verstappen made it clear it's the engines. He said, the whole energy management stuff is just a joke, it's super painful. You try to push more, then you have less energy. It's clipping more and then you have to use a different gear, so you go slower in the corner but faster in the next straight. It has nothing to do with racing for me. So make no mistake, Verstappen still hates this, and the measured sense of optimism that he began Canada with was definitely influenced by an expectation that good changes are definitely coming. Once the doubt about that crept in a little, Max let rip. And he's not alone. Other drivers share his dislike for the engines, while McLaren boss Andrea Stella shares the urgency, if not for quite the same reasons. He's reiterated that the existing tweaks to energy management are helpful but haven't solved the fundamental problem. In team debriefs, drivers are still having to devote loads of time to working out how to game power deployment corner by corner, as the gains and losses from doing so are so significant. But also, accidentally getting things right or wrong on track can swing things enough to undermine the racing too. McLaren's view is that this can clearly be addressed in 2027 and that any manufacturers blocking change for competitive or financial reasons are making an error. The clock is ticking and the stakes are high, not just for Verstappen, but F1 as a whole.